This is the fourth in a series of Families Australia orations by a prominent Australian, offering perspectives on important family and child-related issues and to discuss future policy directions. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to gratefully acknowledge the Berry Street Childhood Institute, which has sponsored this address. The Institute works to build and share knowledge about, first of all, what sustains a good childhood. Second, the best ways to restore the health and well-being of children. And finally, how to create opportunities for the people who have not had a good childhood. I'd like to warmly welcome Marg Hamley, who is the inaugural director of the Berry Street Childhood Institute. Later on, Marg will say a few words to close the session. Although she's overseas at present, I'd also like to acknowledge the leadership of Sandy de Wolf, the CEO of Berry Street, who I think will be known to maybe many of you here this afternoon. Sandy was the chair of Families Australia in our first 10 years, and it was under her leadership that this oration series was established, with the first oration being delivered about 4 or so years ago by the Governor-General, Quentin Bryce, in her first major address as Governor-General. It's wonderful that this year's address is being delivered by Australia's inaugural National Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell. As so many of you know, the idea of establishing the position of National Children's Commissioner has been around for many years, that is, having one in Australia. We're one of the last countries in the OECD set of countries to have one. Megan's appointment last month to the position was a landmark event. And she's a great leader, she's a great champion for children in so many respects, demonstrated not least by her most recent role as New South Wales Commissioner for Children and Young People. And I've had the pleasure of listening to some of the media interviews that Megan has been given over the last couple of weeks, and I hear intriguing things like her impending national listening tour to hear firsthand from particularly children and young people. This is a priority area for her that I'm sure she's going to talk about in a few moments, about the things that they would like to see her do in this job. I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing more about her plans for the job, and this is her first major address in this new role. She's very kindly agreed at the end to take some questions, but also hear your thoughts too, and your comments about the sorts of things that I think you'd like to see her do in the role. So would you please join me in welcoming Megan Mitchell.
Thanks, Brian, and it's great to be amongst so many people committed to the well-being of Australians' children. And I'm really thrilled and honoured to be invited by Prue Warrilow and Brian Babington and Families Australia to deliver the Berry Street Childhood Institute Families Australia Oration. As Brian pointed out, my first speaking engagement in my third week as inaugural National Children's Commissioner. And can I say, Brian and all those who are working with you, what a wonderful event this has been and how smoothly it's all gone. I'm sure everybody is experiencing that. I'd also like to thank the other sponsors of the oration, Sandy de Wolf, the CEO of Berry Street, and Margaret Hamley, Director of Berry Street Childhood Institute. I too thought the Welcome to Country was pretty special this morning, and just shows us how much we have to learn and what deep opportunities we have to learn. But I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this conference takes place and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I don't need to explain to this audience that the call to establish a National Commissioner has been around since Australia ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1990. And over this time, a range of groups like Families Australia and the Human Rights Commission have repeatedly highlighted the need for a dedicated national advocate for children. And meanwhile, several bills were presented without success to Parliament. And with perhaps the most recent impetus provided by the first National Action Plan, part of the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children. That's from 2009 to 2012. And because of that and all those other advocates out there, legislation was eventually passed last year to establish the role. And I do need to congratulate the government for taking this step to acknowledge the needs of Australian children. And with this long history, it's no surprise that we're all anxious to get off the starting blocks. The starting blocks are a bit scary, I have to say. It's a very big job. There's lots of needs of children that we're all aware of, and getting this role right will need the help of all of you. This afternoon, it's tempting then to recite a catalogue of all the issues that need attention, and certainly, as well as outlining my role, I intend to identify some critical child rights issues. But we know children are diverse, and they have a diverse range of needs and experiences, and so it is not possible to do them all justice in just one address. What's more essential, perhaps, is to build an understanding of the framework through which these issues can be approached, as well as to establish a commitment to genuine readiness to listen and engage. For as is the case with any sector of the population vulnerable to disadvantage, too often we make the mistake of shaping an agenda for them rather than with them. In fact, often the casualty of recognition of people's vulnerabilities is a failure to acknowledge their agency. And this may be a particularly complex balancing act when thinking about issues relating to children. However, it's nevertheless essential to acknowledge that children can and should participate in decisions that affect them. And this is a fundamental principle of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. What's more, children's innate understanding of fair play and equal treatment has a lot to teach the adult world about the promotion of human rights. And certainly recent years have seen much said about the importance of listening to and respecting children's voices. However, it's harder to match the rhetoric to the reality. And even when legislation does require children to participate in the decisions made about them, there are limited examples of this actually occurring, or even fewer instances where feedback is given or action is taken as a result. I come to this role then with some initial priorities, yes, with much determination and with a child's right framework through which to approach them. But above all, I come with the aim of facilitating an authentic child voice being heard throughout Australian public policies and in the communities of people who work with children. So I was encouraged by the fact that as part of my recruitment process, I was asked to discuss a topic of contemporary interest to a small group of Years 4 and 5 students from Kingsford Smith School in Holt in the ACT. And I know that the ACT Commissioner who participated in that process is here today, Alastair Roy, and he has some pictures of that event, which he just showed me on his iPad. He's very hip, he always has an iPad. The aim was to stimulate a general consultation with the children and to evaluate how well each applicant communicated with children regarding a particular topic. Students in the sessions were volunteers. They were aged between 9 and 11 years of age, and they were from a range of socio-economic and cultural backgrounds and had varying levels of literacy and verbal skills. And during the introductory sessions that the ACT Children's Commissioner coordinated, the students were asked, what do you think the National Children's Commissioner should be like? What characteristics should they have? A 9-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl and a 12-year-old girl have kindly agreed to read some of these students' responses for us, and I'm going to play this for you. Why doesn't this work? Okay. Is it there? That's it? Is that right? Sorry? Back one. See, kids are really good at
Friendly with kids.
They have good taste in the job and help others. Really up for it.
Good understanding of what they're here to do.
Someone with good responsibility. Understands kids.
Understand what kids want.
Listens to kids. Don't talk down to children or put them down.
Don't talk as if our say doesn't have a meaning.
Hearing things from kids is better than thinking adults know everything. Work well with kids.
They're nice.
They understand children. They listen to children.
Friendly.
Smart. Outgoing.
They like being around kids. Someone who's smiley.
Someone fairly young.
Someone you know well.
Someone who is not 7 feet tall, hunched over and scary. Not a zombie.
Someone who respects children.
Someone that's patient. Someone that's caring. Someone who could help you. Someone that's calm.
That's what they said. And I think we'd all agree that the children identify many of the important characteristics that an effective commissioner should have, and I'd like to think that I meet at least some of those, although I don't think I do the fairly young thing. I'm not quite a zombie yet, which was one of the things that they said, not being a zombie, and I'll never be 7 feet tall. I know that. Nevertheless, I think their words demonstrate a couple of things, actually. The first thing, that with sufficient time and preparation, children and young people were well able to participate in the broader selection process. And I feel honoured to have been chosen via a process that involved children, at least in some part. But secondly, I believe that it also, the characteristics that they pointed to are also the characteristics that any adult working with children who purports or seeks to be child aware should have. And so I think it's all really important for all of us to think about what kind of characteristics adults need to engage effectively with children. So how will I live up to all of these expectations of those children? And I did say to them I wanted to come back to them in a few years' time and tell them what I'd done, and for them to judge me, so that's very scary. But I think it's right. So let me first talk about what I see the role as. Well, the main aspects are threefold: to be a national advocate for the rights and interests of children, to develop and embed mechanisms that ensure a focus on children's interests and enable their participation in decisions that affect them, and to provide leadership and coordination nationally in respect of child rights issues. The Australian Human Rights Commission Act sets out more precisely some of the tools that I must use to perform my role. These include submitting a report to the Minister as soon as practicable after 30 June each year, so I'm a bit worried about that. Promoting discussion and awareness of matters relating to the human rights of children in Australia, and I think it's fair to say that there's not a big conversation in Australia about human rights generally and child rights in particular. Undertaking research or educational or other programs to promote respect for and the enjoyment and exercise of human rights of children in Australia, and examining and reporting on existing and proposed Commonwealth laws to ascertain whether they recognise and protect the human rights of children. The role is part of the collegiate body at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and this is made up of a president, who is also the Human Rights Commissioner, and 6 other commissioners with carriage for race discrimination, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social justice, sex discrimination, disability discrimination and age discrimination. This collegiate approach will be of great assistance given that these specialist commissioners and policy units conduct work on a broad range of issues impacting on children's rights, such as those affecting children with disabilities, Indigenous children's, the girl child, race discrimination, and child asylum seekers and refugees. And what's more, the Commission has existing mechanisms for resolving individual complaints and can intervene in court proceedings that involve children's rights issues. The Commission has already advanced significant work on children's rights prior to the establishment of the dedicated role. For instance, in 2004, it conducted a national inquiry into children in immigration detention, and in 2012 released a national inquiry into the age assessment of young Indonesian fishing crews suspected of people smuggling offences. The Commission is also currently prioritising work that tackles violence, harassment and bullying, and builds understanding and respect for rights in our community. These are things that cut across the experience of all children everywhere. And I was really excited then to see the powerful anti-bullying ads by young people in the Commissioner's Back Me Up campaign, which, in partnership with a range of agencies and social media organisations, offered young people the tools to take safe and effective action when they witness cyberbullying. Equally promising is the Commission's participation in consultations on the national school curriculum, and I've been having discussions with the unit responsible for that. However, despite its significant work on protecting children's rights, there has been no Commissioner dedicated solely to child rights. And until now, the Commission has not been specifically resourced to conduct policy work in this area. And I'm very excited then by the prospect of working together with the Commission and with you and other external partners to bring the human rights of children squarely into the spotlight. There are several areas of work at the Commission on which I am particularly keen to collaborate. One relates to the work of Mick Gooder, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commissioner, in promoting justice reinvestment. This is a strategy to help reverse the high levels of Indigenous incarceration by reorienting criminal justice systems towards prevention rather than detention, and investing resources into communities with high concentrations of offenders. As Mick has said, the current approach to offending is clearly not working, and it is critical to find ways to prevent offending and re-offending from an early age. And according to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, Indigenous children aged 0 to 17 were 31 times as likely as non-Indigenous young people to be in detention on an average night in 2012. And this is up from 21 times as likely in 2008. That is, 1 in every 217 Indigenous young people aged 0 to 17 were in detention on an average night. Clearly we must do better. And in addition to working with Mick, I hope to work with my state and territory counterparts to ensure all children's interests are adequately monitored in juvenile justice systems and examine how children can be more effectively diverted away from contact with these systems at all. Another related area at the Commission is a project led by Graham Innes, the Disability Discrimination Commissioner. Research shows that many people with disabilities have inadequate access to justice within the criminal justice system, especially those who need communication supports or who have complex and multiple support needs. The Disability Discrimination Commissioner's project will identify the impediments to access to justice for people with communication and other impairments, outline best practice and incorporate a human rights approach into this practice. And I'm really keen to be part of and contribute to this project so that the needs of children with disabilities who are victims, who are witnesses and offenders are better identified, understood and responded to. The foundation of all this work, of course, is a child rights perspective, and one which holds decision makers to account, which recognises that children have agency as rights holders, and which is firmly based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This convention is the most important of the human rights treaties underpinning the work of the Children's Commissioner, and is specifically recognised in the legislation along with other relevant human rights conventions. It recognises that children have the same basic rights as adults, while also needing special protection due to their vulnerability of them being children. When it came into effect, children were recognised as rights bearers for the first time in the international human rights treaty system. And apart from its ethical and moral force, the Convention is a legal document which sets out standards and assigns responsibility for ensuring these standards are met. Australia has obligations to realise the rights in the Convention, and by ratifying the treaty, it has promised, at international law, to protect a range of children's rights. The question is whether the nation has made good on this promise. Certainly, it's pleasing to see that the principles that underpin the national framework for protecting Australia's children are in line with the Convention. However, as many of you know, last June the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child issued its concluding observation on Australia's 5-year progress in implementing the Convention. And these show that while Australia has made some progress, there are still many children who fall through the gaps. In particular, the committee made critical observation regarding the Convention's guiding principles of non-discrimination, the best interests of the child, right to life, survival and development, and respect for the views of the child. And these guiding principles are the building blocks for a child-centred approach to legislation, to policy and to practice. So I'd like to take the time to reflect a little bit more on what the committee said about them. The UN Committee was particularly concerned about the widespread discrimination faced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including in terms of the provision of and accessibility to basic services, as well as the significant overrepresentation in the criminal justice and care systems. I've already touched on the rise in the number of incarcerated Indigenous children, and we've heard today already also from the early speakers and throughout the day of the record numbers of children in out-of-home care, and the AHW put that at 39,621 in 2012, and with the rate of Indigenous children in out-of-home care 10 times the rate for non-Indigenous children. And there's also been a 20% jump in the number of substantiated abuse and neglect cases involving nearly 38,000 children. And this is 6,200 more than the year before. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were 8 times more likely than other children to be the subject of substantiated child abuse and neglect. We cannot and must not become immune to figures like these. Addressing the needs of especially vulnerable children, such as Indigenous children in contact with the child protection system, is surely one of our collective national challenges. Under the Human Rights Commission Act, I'm able to give particular attention to children who are at risk or vulnerable. And the Act, while it doesn't specify any particular groups, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has certainly identified Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children as one of the groups needing particular attention. So I therefore look forward to being part of the work that the second National Action Plan, the second action plan of the national framework, is going to pursue in terms of child safety for Indigenous children under the national priority for closing the gap. The UN Committee was also concerned that the principle of the best interests of the child is not widely known or appropriately integrated and consistently applied in all legal frameworks impacting on children. And there are, of course, areas where this principle has been embedded in law, and examples being the Family Law Act, which now incorporates a direct reference to the Convention, and also in terms of state and territory child protection laws. And this obviously helps to drive good practice in this area. However, this principle has not been sufficiently integrated into other areas relevant to children. For instance, in regard to asylum seeker children and children in detention. And moreover, there is an ongoing challenge, I believe, for the second action plan in marrying the policy impetus with the actual practice on the ground. Addressing the disparity, I believe, that still exists in this area will be fundamental also in monitoring the Convention and its impact on children. The right to life, survival and development is also a fundamental principle of the Convention, And without these basic preconditions, how can our children thrive? The UN Committee expressed a number of concerns about the socio-economic conditions for certain groups of children in Australia. It noted the significant health disparities of children living in rural and remote areas, children in out-of-home care, as well as children with disabilities, and the gap in health status between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal children. It is actually pleasing that some measures to address these disparities are having an effect, such as the recent announcement under the Close the Gap campaign that under 5 mortality rates for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are starting to fall. And I think this also shows that if we're going to make a difference at a population level, we really need to be in there for the long haul. And in that context, we do need assurances that funding will continue after June this year, when that national partnership relating to the Close the Gap campaign runs out. The latest Australian Early Development Index findings also indicate some improvements. Since the first index in 2009, the percentage of developmentally vulnerable children has slightly decreased, and the proportion of vulnerable Indigenous children has fallen from 47% to 43%. And while there's a drop, these figures are still obviously far too high. In this context, I'm concerned we're not adequately addressing the socio-economic needs of certain vulnerable groups of children. For example, the recent Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth report, the Oration report card, showed that the gap between rich and poor continues to increase. It showed that over 1 in 6 children lived at or below the poverty line in 2010, and this puts Australia in the bottom third of OECD countries in that respect. In addition, as many as 15% of 0 to 14-year-olds live in jobless families, and this puts Australia 4th last out of all OECD countries for that indicator. These alarming figures surely call into question whether children's needs are being properly considered in social welfare measures and in the suite of supports families and children need to safeguard their well-being when work or well-paid work is not an option. Finally, while the UN Committee acknowledged that Australia had put some mechanisms in place for the participation of young people, it noted significant gaps remain, in particular for children under 15. As I outlined, I'm especially interested to know how we can promote meaningful participation of children in the decisions and processes that affect them. After all, participation is fundamental to the enjoyment of other rights. For example, individual complaint systems, which many adults use to address injustices, often do not adequately engage children and young people. How can children who suffer injustice seek redress or raise their concerns if mechanisms are unknown, inaccessible and inappropriate? This is an area I believe needs urgent attention. We must also get better at using mechanisms that allow children and young people to be heard. I understand that the first national online survey of children in out-of-home care is currently being piloted in New South Wales, Victoria, WA and Queensland. This is a great step forward. It will be important for us to ensure that the results are used to drive up the quality of practice across Australia so that all kids, no matter where they live, receive the finest care we can provide them. Equally, I'd like to see children's rights principles incorporated in this survey over time, and I'll be working towards that. Either way, it's essential to hear from children and young people about their experiences so that we can continue to improve our policies and practices in ways that work for them, not for us. As an example, according to the Create 2013 report card, and I know that others have talked about this report card today, less than 1/3 of children and young people surveyed knew about the existence of a care or case plan for them. This reveals that many children in care are not adequately involved in decisions which directly affect them. And this is not only disempowering for those young people, but it's also not good practice. We need more workers like the ones Marie Walk talked about that really seek to engage and can engage with children. And there are many practical changes that can be made to address this. For example, with the help of Create, young people now regularly assist with caseworker training, demonstrating the benefits of engaging young people and showing caseworkers that it's not that hard. Put simply, we must learn from the mistakes of the past when children's voices were ignored with devastating consequences. The Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse will, I am sure, uncover stories where children's voices were unheard and even when heard, were deliberately not taken into account. We need to make sure our attitudes and systems respect child voice. This is one of the essential ways we can help children to be safe, to realise their potential and to live confident, full and happy lives. In the end, of course, there is no better advertisement for children's participation than the views of children themselves. I'd now like to play you some excerpts from a short DVD made by the Create Foundation. Some of you may have seen this. It was shown at the 2012 ACWA Conference on Youth Participation. The young people speaking are no longer children, but are speaking about their recent experience of being in out-of-home care. Yeah. No. Is this right? There.
Participation means to me basically two words. It means getting involved. So whether that's actively engaging in activities or someone's practices, to just listening and collaborating ideas.
Big decisions like where I was going to go to school, who I was going to live with, when I was going to see my biological family, they're all really big things that young people should be participating in.
Being involved in decision making. So I recently turned 18, so I had my transition from care plan, and with that we go through a lot of what am I going to do next year, what am I going to do for the rest of the year, what am I going to need, and that sort of stuff.
You know, even just the general conversations about how school was, what am I into at the moment, what cartoons am I watching, what games am I playing. You know, that's what really built the connections with my caseworkers and I.
My relationship with my CSOs was formal and very informal. Like, we had a friendship. We were able to talk about my day or what she did, and we sort of stayed that fine line of being able to connect on a social and professional level.
Yeah, well, I definitely think that participating is important because without that, it feels like our lives are just sort of being controlled.
Those decisions really did make me feel like I was making my own choices, because a lot of the time I always felt like I was always being told what to do, where I was meant to go.
But I think participating alongside adults gave me a lot of confidence. I felt like I built a big wall of resilience when it came to adults, because all they ever did was take over my life pretty much. And I think working alongside of them and actually being even with them gave me confidence to actually listen and just made me feel empowered pretty much.
So it did teach me to say, this is my voice and this is what I think. And it didn't always happen the way I wanted it to, but I was giving my opinion.
I absolutely enjoyed my caseworkers coming over because I was like, yes, my best mate's here, we're going out, we're going bowling, we're going to go do something fun. I'm not going to sit around the house all day watching cartoons. Even feeling spoiled for that 5 minutes, that's what really made it for me. Really made it for me and my caseworkers.
One mistake that's made with young people in participation is that too many people assume that you don't understand exactly what decisions are being made, therefore it's okay to make them without the young person present. You're never too young when it's your life that's changing. Whether or not they get to decide whether it happens or not, they still have a right to say, this is my opinion.
Yeah, life decisions are being made without even your consultation. Like, you go to a school for 7 years, go to a different foster carer, and they won't even ask you if you want to stay in that school. They just change you.
My advice to any caseworker is your attitude. If you walk in there with a big, bubbly attitude, hey mate, how you going? Anything like that, a kid's going to open up to you a bit more. They're going to want to see a best friend, someone who's going to be around whenever they can call them or anything like that. And then once you've had your little bit of fun, sit down and have a bit of a conversation about the more serious things, you know?
There's a time to be formal and there's a time to be informal. And you can still be formal while coming down to that young person's level, making them feel comfortable enough to want to be involved.
I think for the child to realise that it's okay to participate is the biggest thing, and they can't feel like it's okay to participate if they don't feel okay with that person. So the biggest part is a relationship.
If you don't have that friend in that child, you're not going to get anywhere. They're going to just see you as another person in their life telling them what to do.
So not telling us what we should be doing, or not telling us that these are the right decisions to be making, or listening to what we think will be like a good decision.
I think if the young person is old enough to be told that this discussion has taken place and that this is the decision that came out of that, they're old enough to be involved in the decision process.
It's really important to know that people are real and people are there and people actually care. After what you've been through, you're in foster care for a reason, and most of the time it's because no one's cared.
They do some great work, Create, and who wouldn't want a job that involves going bowling? As Jolene told us in the DVD, if you're old enough to be told and to understand the results of a decision about your life, then you're old enough to be involved in that decision in some way. And my experience with kids is that they are the experts in their lives, they have a lot to say, and they're incredibly insightful, and we need not to ignore them. This returns me then to the beginning of my speech. Over the few weeks that I've been there, and over the next little while, my team and I have been mapping out a national listening tour to commence as soon as possible, so that I can talk directly to children and young people and children's advocates about what's important to them. Given the diversity of kids within the community, we need to think very carefully about how their views are best obtained, and I'd like to use the results of this tour to guide our future work. And it's so important in that context that we hear from different groups of children across the states and territories. That said, it will not be possible for us to cover absolutely every issue relating to children as much as I would like to, and some tough choices will have to be made about priorities. What I can say with certainty is that ensuring the authentic child voice will be a part of the package. As a commentator in the news recently said about my appointment, which is a pretty remarkable thing to say in the news, was it's time to grow up and talk to kids. In 5 years' time, I'd like to be able to say that genuine engagement of children in decisions that affect them is a systematic part of decision making, both within government and within agencies that work with children or on behalf of children. And I look forward to shaping that work with the many of you here today. And it's only by working together, and that's another theme of this conference, that we can enable children to be better heard, and in doing so, make children's rights a reality. And that's for every child, and that's everywhere, and that's every day. Thank you.